The smell of oil is my cologne. It's a scent that gets deep into your skin, a perfume of honest work that no amount of scrubbing can fully erase. It's in the whorls of my fingerprints, etched into the calluses that map a lifetime of turning wrenches and feeling the heartbeat of machinery. My hands are a topographical chart of my 73 years, scarred, rough, and permanently stained with the ghost of 1,000 engines. I've never been ashamed of them. They fed my family, built a life, and kept the world turning, one tuned-up car and repaired machine at a time. My old pickup truck is a testament to that. A 1993 Ford F-150. Its paint faded to a vague memory of red, and its chassis speckled with the rust of 30 Midwestern winters. I know every sigh and groan it makes, every subtle shift in its engine's rhythm. I've rebuilt it, piece by piece, over 30 years. It's not a vehicle, it's a journal, written in grease and steel. I was driving it that Tuesday, the one that started with sunshine and pride and ended with a cold, hard knot in my gut. I'd just come from the parts store, a new fuel filter rattling in the passenger seat footwell, when I saw him. My grandson, Tom. My heart did its usual little leap it always does when I see him. He's 21, tall and lanky with his mother's smile, the first in our family to go to college. My pride in him is a physical thing, a warm, steady hum in my chest. I'd spent the summer before his freshman year tuning up his little sedan, making sure it was safe and reliable for the commute. I'd slipped him cash for books, told him stories about being the first in my own family to start a small business, trying to imbue him with a confidence I never had.
He was standing outside a trendy coffee shop downtown, a place with minimalist decor and names for coffee I don't understand. He was with a group, 2 young men in crisp branded shirts and a young woman with artfully torn jeans. They looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for a life I'd only ever seen on television. I felt a smile spread across my face, genuine and unguarded. I pulled the old truck over to the curb with its familiar wheeze and clatter, ignoring the disapproving looks from a couple passing by. I climbed out, my knees protesting with their usual creak, and raised a hand in a wave. "Tom!" I called, my voice rough and loud compared to the soft murmur of the street. He turned, and I saw it. It was a flash, quicker than a camera's shutter, but I have an eye for detail honed by 60 years of spotting hairline cracks in metal and tiny leaks in gaskets. I saw the smile freeze on his face, then shatter. His eyes, usually so bright and quick, widened in something that was not delight, but pure, undiluted panic. His posture, which had been relaxed and open, snapped shut. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, a boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The warmth in my chest began to curdle. One of his friends, a boy with perfectly coiffed hair, nudged him. "Who's that, Tom?" There was a beat of silence, a heartbeat, 2. I could see the calculations running behind Tom's eyes, the frantic search for an exit. He looked from me and my oil-stained jeans and my faded flannel shirt to his polished friends, and then back to me. The truck sat behind me, rumbling and inelegant, a glaring announcement of my station in life.
He cleared his throat, a nervous, tight sound. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. Just some old neighbor," he said, his voice artificially light. The words didn't hurt at first. They were too bizarre, too impossible to register as pain. It was like being hit with a block of ice. The cold was so profound it felt like nothing at all. Neighbor? The word echoed in the hollow space he'd just carved out inside me. I saw my daughter's face in his, the granddaughter he'd once been, The little boy who'd sat on a stool in my garage, handing me tools and listening with rapt attention as I explained what a carburetor did. I remembered the feel of his small, trusting hand in my rough, greasy one. All of that reduced to some old neighbor. My smile, which had been frozen on my face, finally died. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a nod of understanding, but of acknowledgement. I saw it. I heard it. I registered the betrayal. I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, what would come out? A roar of pain? A cold, hard question? The sound of a heart breaking is not a dramatic crack. It's the quiet, internal shatter of crystal, a million tiny fractures spreading in an instant. I turned around. The act of pivoting on my heel felt Herculean. I walked back to the truck, each step heavy and deliberate. The driver's side door groaned as I opened it, a sound of solidarity from my old metal friend. I didn't look back. I pulled away from the curb, the truck's engine sounding louder and rougher than ever in my ears, a clumsy beast fleeing a scene of exquisite social grace. The drive home was a blur. The knot in my stomach had hardened into a cold, dense stone of anger. It wasn't a hot, shouting anger. It was the deep, cold anger of a craftsman whose life's work has been insulted. My life, my work, my love. It was all just an embarrassment to him, a stain on his new collegiate identity. I was a relic from a past he was trying to bury, a past he was clearly ashamed of. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel a welcome sound. The garage door was open, revealing my sanctuary. It's not just a garage, it's a museum of a life spent solving problems. Tools hang in perfect order on pegboards, their outlines drawn in marker like artifacts waiting to be used. Shelves hold coffee cans labeled with screws and bolts of every size. In the corner, under a canvas sheet, sits my legacy project, a 1957 John Deere 720 tractor I've been restoring for a client. It's a beautiful, complex piece of machinery, and its resurrection has been a slow, patient labor of love. I walked into the garage, the smell of grease, metal, and gasoline washing over me like a balm. This was my truth. This was real. Here, a thing was either fixed or it was broken. A bolt was either tight or it was loose. There was no ambiguity, no shame, no just an old neighbor. I picked up a ratchet, feeling its familiar, solid weight in my palm. This is what I knew. This is who I was. And my grandson was ashamed of it. The cold anger began to simmer, to take shape. He didn't want the old mechanic in his life? Fine. But he would remember exactly who I was. He would learn that the man he dismissed as just a neighbor had designed and built hydraulic systems that were still running in factories across the state, that I had consulted for engineering firms, that my hands had not just fixed things, but created them. He thought my value was in the stains on my clothes. He was about to learn that my real value was in the knowledge in my head and the strength of the legacy he was so carelessly discarding. The revenge, when the idea came, wasn't a shout. It was a quiet click, like a perfectly machined part sliding into place. It was elegant. It was just. And it would be delivered not with a sledgehammer, but with the precise turn of a wrench. The next few weeks were a study in silence. The phone, which usually rang with Tom's requests for advice on his car or updates on his classes, remained quiet. The silence was a presence in my house, a heavy blanket smothering the usual sounds of my puttering life. I went about my days, working on the tractor, doing odd jobs for neighbors, maintaining my own kingdom of machines, but a part of me was constantly elsewhere, planning, refining. I didn't confront him. What was there to say? How dare you be ashamed of me? It would sound pathetic, the plea of a weak old man. No. A lesson taught in anger is a lesson soon forgotten. A lesson taught in shame, however, is seared into the memory. The opportunity presented itself through my daughter, Linda. She called, her voice bright and cheerful, oblivious to the chasm that had opened between her son and her father. "Dad, you'll never guess what," she chirped. "Tom's college is having a big career networking night next month. For the engineering and business students, they're inviting family members who work in relevant fields to come and sit at tables, talk to students about real-world careers. I immediately thought of you." I was sitting at my kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in front of me. I looked out the window at my garage. "Oh," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Yes, I told Tom your grandfather has forgotten more about mechanical engineering than most of those professors will ever know. He's worked with every kind of machine there is. You'd be perfect. You could give those kids some real advice, not just textbook nonsense." I could hear the pride in her voice. She'd always brought her school friends over, showing them what I was working on with a proprietary glee. The contrast with her son was a fresh, sharp pain. "Did Tom think it was a good idea?" I asked, probing gently. There was a slight hesitation on the line. "Well, you know Tom. He's quiet, but I'm sure he'd be thrilled. I already put your name forward to the event coordinator, a Professor Evans. He called me back and was so impressed when I told him about your work with the automated assembly lines at the old Miller plant. He said they'd be honored to have you."
A slow, cold smile touched my lips. Professor Evans. The name was filed away. So Tom hadn't told his mother about our encounter. He was keeping his shame a secret. This was better than I could have planned. "I'd be happy to, Linda," I said, my voice warm for her benefit. "It sounds like a wonderful event." After I hung up, the planning began in earnest. This wasn't just about showing up. This was a surgical strike. I needed the right tools for the job. My best suit was a navy blue three-piece number I'd bought for my 50th wedding anniversary, 10 years gone now. It still fit, a testament to a frame that had stayed the same even as the world around it had softened. I took it to the best tailor in the county, a quiet Vietnamese man named Mr. Tran, whose hands were as skilled with fabric as mine were with metal. We let the trousers out a fraction and had the jacket pressed to a knife's edge. I went to a proper barber, not the quick clip place, and had my white hair trimmed and my beard shaped from its usual scruff into something distinguished. I bought a new shirt, a crisp white cotton, and a tie the color of a deep, serious red wine. I polished my good shoes, a pair of cap-toe Oxfords, until I could see my grim reflection in the leather. The day of the event, I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. The man staring back at me was not the old neighbor from the coffee shop. This man looked like a retired CEO, a board chairman, a man whose opinions were sought after and whose handshake still meant something. The rough, calloused hands were the only thing that gave him away, and even they were scrubbed clean, the nails neatly filed. I looked impressive. I looked like the man I was, stripped of the superficial judgments based on work clothes. I drove to the college in my truck. I'd considered renting a car, but that felt like a lie. The truck was part of me. Let it clatter into the parking lot. Let them see the contrast.
Let them wonder. The university campus was a world of sleek, modern buildings and carefully manicured quads. Students moved in buzzing packs, their backpacks slung over shoulders, their lives full of potential and theoretical problems. I found the event hall, a bright, airy space with a vaulted ceiling already buzzing with conversation. Tables were arranged in a large U shape, each with a name placard. I found mine. It read, in elegant script, Robert Miller, Industrial Engineering and Mechanical Design. My heart gave a little thump. Miller. My name, my legacy. It had been a long time since I'd seen it in such a formal setting. Professor Evans found me before I could sit down. He was a man in his late 50s with a sharp, intelligent face and a firm handshake. "Mr. Miller, it's an honor," he said, his gaze appreciative, taking in the suit, the posture, the whole presentation. "When your daughter explained your background, I was astounded. The hydraulic sequencing system you designed for the Miller plant is a case study we use in our third-year practical applications class. It's a masterpiece of elegant, problem-solving engineering." I shook his hand, feeling the familiar roughness of my palm against his. It was just a matter of understanding the flow. The textbooks overcomplicate it. His eyes lit up. "Exactly! That's what I try to tell them." He guided me to my table, and as I sat down, I let my eyes scan the room. And there he was, Tom. He was standing with a group of his friends, the same polished cohort from the coffee shop. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting blazer and looked deeply uncomfortable. He hadn't seen me yet. The show was about to begin. For the first hour, I held court. Students drifted from table to table, collecting business cards and platitudes. But a small crowd began to gather at mine. They were engineering students, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They'd seen my name on the placard, heard a whisper from Professor Evans. I didn't lecture. I told stories. I talked about the time the main press at the automotive factory in Fremont was about to shut down for a week, costing millions because of a failed bearing no one could identify. I described the sound it made, a high-frequency whine buried under the roar of the line, and how I'd isolated it with a mechanic's stethoscope I'd made from a long screwdriver and a funnel. I described the feel of the faulty bearing, the slight gritty resistance that wasn't present in the others. I showed them with my hands how to truly listen to a machine. "The blueprints and the schematics are the theory," I said, my voice low and carrying. "But the machine itself is the truth. It will always tell you what's wrong if you're quiet enough to listen." "Your hands," I said, holding mine up, the scars and calluses on full display in the bright lights of the hall, "are your most important diagnostic tools. Never forget that." They were captivated. They asked questions about torque, about metallurgy, about the transition from manual to automated systems. I answered them all, not with jargon, but with the plain, powerful language of experience. I saw the respect in their eyes. It was the same look the young apprentices in my shop had given me 50 years ago. It was real. It was then that Tom's group meandered over. They'd been drawn by the crowd. I saw the boy with the perfect hair, the one who'd asked, "Who's that?" His eyes were wide as he read my placard. He was listening. Tom was lagging behind, his face a mask of confusion as he tried to see who was holding everyone's attention. Then, our eyes met. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. His jaw went slack. He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing the old neighbor. He was seeing a stranger in a sharp suit, holding the rapt attention of his peers and his professor, a man being treated with a deference he clearly couldn't comprehend. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful to watch. It was the moment the schematic in his head exploded, and he was forced to confront the complex, living, breathing truth of the machine. Professor Evans chose that moment to clap me on the shoulder, beaming. "This is the man, everyone," he announced to the group, which now included Tom, frozen at its periphery. "Robert Miller. He designed the pressure regulation system that half the packaging plants in this state still rely on. He's a living legend in practical industrial engineering. We're incredibly fortunate to have him here." The boy with the perfect hair, whose name I would learn was Jason, turned to Tom, his expression a mixture of awe and accusation. His voice was loud in the momentary lull. All eyes turned to Tom. He looked like a rabbit caught in a snare. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was red-faced, sweating, completely exposed. This was the climax. This was the moment the lie he'd built his new identity on crumbled into dust in front of the very people he'd built it for. He was choking, right on schedule, but not on my words, on his own shame. I stood up. I moved around the table, my movements slow and deliberate. The crowd parted for me. I walked up to my grandson, who seemed to shrink with every step I took. I could smell the faint, cheap cologne he was wearing. I could see the panic in his eyes, the sheer terror of what I might say. I placed my hand on his shoulder, my old, rough mechanic's hand now resting on the cheap fabric of his blazer. The touch was firm, but not heavy, proprietorial. It was the touch of a grandfather. I looked at the group, at Jason, at the professor, and I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of profound, almost sorrowful affirmation. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and carrying, filled with a warmth that was both genuine and strategically deployed, "Tom here is my grandson. I couldn't be prouder of him." The look on his face was indeed priceless. It was a cataclysm of emotions: shock, relief, a dawning, horrifying understanding, and a shame so deep it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. The tension in the group broke. There were murmurs of, "Wow, Tom, that's so cool," and "Why were you keeping him a secret?" I had not bragged. I had not exposed his lie directly. I had simply stated a fact wrapped in a public declaration of pride. By not humiliating him further, I had humiliated him more completely than any accusation could have. I had taken the high road, and in doing so, I had forced him to look up and see how far he had fallen. I gave his shoulder a final, slight squeeze, a silent communication that passed between us. "I know what you did. I have always known, and this is the man you were ashamed of." Then I turned back to my table, to the waiting students, to my reclaimed dignity. The conversation resumed, but Tom remained standing there for a long moment, a statue of disgrace, before he eventually melted back into the crowd, unseen. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. I didn't expect him to. Some repairs take time. You have to let the new sealant cure. A week passed. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence of convalescence. I was in the garage, elbow deep in the transmission of the John Deere. the smell of gear oil thick in the air. The physical work was a meditation, the rhythmic turning of bolts a mantra that calmed the lingering echoes of the confrontation. I heard a car pull into the driveway, the familiar sound of Tom's sedan. I didn't look up. I kept working, listening to the sound of the car door closing, the hesitant footsteps on the gravel, the soft creak of the garage door being pushed open further. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the afternoon sun. I finally glanced over. He was back in his jeans and a t-shirt, looking like the boy I knew, not the strained young man in the cheap blazer. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. "Grandpa?" he said, his voice quiet. I grunted in acknowledgement, wiping my hands on a red shop towel. I didn't offer him a way in. He had to find it himself. He took a few steps into the garage, his eyes avoiding mine, scanning the familiar territory of my world. He looked at the tractor, at the tools on the wall, at the old, grease-stained poster of a Chevrolet V8 engine that had hung there since before he was born. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice cracking. "What I did downtown, it was the stupidest, most shameful thing I've ever done." I remained silent, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between us. He was just, I don't know. "They're all from money. Their parents are doctors, lawyers, executives. They talk about skiing trips and investment portfolios, and I'm just me. I guess I thought if they saw you, if they saw where I really came from, they'd, I don't know, see me as less." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I was trying to fit in, and I threw you under the bus to do it. I'm so sorry." The raw honesty of it disarmed the last of my cold anger. He wasn't making excuses. He was stating the pathetic human truth of his cowardice. He was a boy trying to build a new identity, and he'd thought he had to dismantle the old one to do it. I sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to come from the very core of my 73 years. I picked up a small, precision wrench, turning it over in my hand. "You know what this is?" I asked him. He looked confused. "A wrench? It's a 10mm combination wrench," I corrected gently. "See? It's stamped right here. It has a specific purpose. It has a specific strength. I wouldn't use it to hammer in a nail, and I wouldn't use a sledgehammer to tighten this little bolt here." I pointed to a small fastener on the transmission housing. "You have to use the right tool for the job. And you, Tom, you're trying to use the wrong tool to build your life." I set the wrench down and looked him square in the eye. "You think those kids with the rich parents are the right tool? They're just shiny, flashy. Maybe they're a gold-plated hammer. But a tool isn't judged by its shine, son. It's judged by its strength, by its integrity, by what it can build and what it can fix." I gestured around the garage. This is strength. This is integrity. This is a legacy of building and fixing. You come from a long line of people who solved real problems. That is worth more than all the ski trips in the world. And you were ready to trade it for what? The approval of a bunch of kids who don't know a drive shaft from a cucumber? He flinched, but he didn't look away. The tears were falling freely now. "I know. I'm an idiot." "No," I said, my voice softening. "You're young, and you lost your way. There's a difference." I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder again, just as I had at the networking event. But this time, it was different. This was not a public performance. It was a private restoration. The man you were ashamed of is the same man who gave you the hands-on curiosity that probably helps you in your engineering classes. The same man who taught you how to think through a problem. That man is part of you, Tom. You can't cut him out without cutting out a part of your own soul." He nodded, a sob catching in his throat. "I know, Grandpa. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said. "Apology accepted." The words were a release. The tension that had held him rigid finally broke, and he seemed to collapse inward for a moment before straightening up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked around the garage, and this time it was not with the eyes of someone seeing an embarrassment, but with the eyes of someone coming home. "So," he said, sniffing, "the 720, how's the transmission rebuild going?" I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I picked up the torque wrench and handed it to him. "Well, since you're here, you can make yourself useful. Let me show you." He took the wrench, his hand, still soft and young, fitting comfortably around the tool. He listened as I began to explain the intricacies of the synchronizer rings. And as I spoke, I saw the old light in his eyes, the one that had been there when he was a boy on a stool, the one that saw the magic in how things worked. It hadn't been extinguished. It had just been buried under a layer of fear and foolishness. It would take more than one afternoon to scrape all that rust off, but it was a start. And I'm a patient man. I know that the most worthwhile repairs are never rushed. You just have to have the right tools and the wisdom to use them. What's the most unexpected plot twist you've ever seen in a family story?